My son deleted me from the Christmas group chat. Hours later, he discovered the business accounts were zeroed out. I never thought 26 years of a mother's love could be erased with a single click. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for a second, feel that this seems familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. It was 11 in the morning when the phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee that was cooling while I peeled potatoes for tonight's prime rib roast. My fingers, already wrinkled by 68 years and thousands of hours working dough at the family bakery, trembled slightly as I picked up the mobile. The notification read, "You have been removed from the group Family Christmas." I blinked several times, as if the letters would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I opened WhatsApp and searched for the group. It was gone. Simply vanished. As if it had never existed. As if I had never existed in it. I stood there, in the middle of my kitchen that smelled of bay leaf and sautéed onion, dressed in my navy blue apron, the same one I'd worn for 30 years at the Hearth Bakery, the business I built brick by brick after my husband, George, died of a heart attack. The apron had flour stains that never completely came out, a silent testament to the pre-dawn hours I spent kneading bread to support my son, Dan, when he was a boy. The kitchen table was set for 4. I had put out the good china, the white plates with gold rims that I bought at an estate sale in the historic district 20 years ago, when I still believed that family traditions were sacred. The cloth napkins were folded with care, each with its silver napkin ring inherited from my mother. In the center, I had placed the small ceramic nativity scene that Dan gave me when he turned 15, a miniature Holy Family that had survived 3 moves and 28 Christmases. I looked at the phone again. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the group had crashed due to some technical issue. I dialed Dan's number. "Yes?" He answered with that tone of voice he used when he was busy at the office. The voice he'd developed since he became the successful CEO. Since he transformed my little neighborhood bakery into a chain of 3 locations that now generated profits of over $200,000 a year. "Dan, son, I can't find the Christmas group chat. Did something happen?" Silence. A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds, but which felt like an eternity. "Oh, right, Mom. It's just that, well, Chelsea and I decided to do something smaller this year. You know, a little more intimate." Chelsea, his wife, the woman who came into our lives 5 years ago with her perfect smile, her perpetually flawless nails, and her way of referring to me as the Mrs. instead of Mom, even after I gave her my engagement ring when they married. "But Dan, we always celebrate together. I've been preparing the prime rib all week. I bought the special pecan pie you like, those candied pecans that—" "Mom, don't get worked up. It's not personal. It's just that, well, this year we want to do something different. More modern. Just us, the kids, and, well, the people who are more involved in the important family decisions. The people who are more involved in the important family decisions." Each word plunged into my chest like a needle. I, who had mortgaged my house twice to finance the business expansion. I, who had worked 18-hour days for 10 years so he could study business administration at a private college. I, who had signed every paper he asked me to sign, trusting blindly when he told me, "Mom, it's better if everything is in my name for tax reasons. You don't understand these business things." "And I'm not involved in the important decisions?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I would have liked. "Mom, you're not actively working in the company anymore. Chelsea handles the administration, I run the operations, and the kids. Well, they're the future. You've already done your part. Now rest." "You've already done your part." As if a mother's love had an expiration date. As if sacrifices had a time limit after which they became irrelevant. "All right," I murmured, though my heart fractured like antique glass. "All right, son." I hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the silence known only to houses too big for a single person. The house where Dan grew up, where he learned to walk by holding on to this very table, where he cried when his father died, and I consoled him by promising he would never want for anything. I looked out the window onto my block. The neighbors were hanging Christmas lights on their balconies. Children ran on the sidewalk dragging toy wagons. The city in December was buzzing with that special energy, that mix of biting cold and warm hope that had always made me feel alive. But today, for the first time in 68 years, I felt invisible. I picked up the plates from the table, 4 plates that would not be used. I put the good china away in the cupboard, each piece wrapped in tissue paper as if it were a body. I folded the napkins and put them in the drawer, along with the hopes I'd had for this Christmas. Then I sat down on the living room sofa, that burgundy velvet couch that George and I bought when we moved here in 1987. The curtains were half drawn, letting in golden rays of light that illuminated the family photographs on the mantelpiece. There was Dan at 5 years old, missing his front teeth, hugging the Santa Claus doll I brought him from Macy's. There he was at his graduation, in his cap and gown, holding up his diploma while I cried with pride behind the camera. There he was on his wedding day, handsome in his gray suit, with Chelsea radiant beside him, and I was in the background, in my navy dress that took me 3 months of late-night sewing to finish. In all those photographs, I was there, present, important, necessary. When had I stopped being? I took my phone and opened Instagram, the app Dan taught me to use, so you can stay current, Mom. His profile was full of company photos. The Hearth Bakery, tradition and quality since 1995. Tradition that I had started. Quality that I had ensured by waking up at 4 in the morning for years. My name didn't appear in any photo. No description mentioned that the founder was still alive. It was as if the company's story had begun when he took over, as if the first 15 years of sacrifice and work were an irrelevant prologue. The phone vibrated. A message from my 14-year-old granddaughter, Paige. Grandma, Dad says we're not coming to your house for Christmas this year. He says we're going to a restaurant. I wanted to come with you, but they said you're too old to cook for all of us. You're too old to cook for all of us. 68 years old. Too old. As if age were a contagious disease. As if the love I had put into every specialty muffin, every pecan cluster, every dish I had prepared for decades, had lost its flavor simply because my hands had more wrinkles. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to the night sounds of the city, distant sirens, the murmur of traffic that never completely stopped, the footsteps of early risers heading to work. I thought of all the past Christmases. George carving the ham while I took the appetizers out of the oven. Little Dan, impatiently waiting for midnight to open the gifts. The laughter, the hugs, the human warmth that turned our house into a home. How had all this transformed into a burden they wanted to be rid of? At 6 in the morning, I got up and made coffee. Black coffee, because there was no point in making any for anyone else. I sat in the kitchen with the cup between my hands, letting the steam warm my face, and for the first time in decades, I had nothing to do. No one who needed my food, my care, my presence. For the first time in my life, I was completely free, and that freedom gave me as much fear as hope. The next day, as I gathered the crumbs from the breakfast I had eaten alone, my gaze stopped at the drawer where I kept important documents. I hadn't opened it in months, but something compelled me to. Perhaps I needed to remember who I was before I became this invisible woman who was surplus to family celebrations. I took out the manila folder that contained the entire history of the bakery. The first contracts, yellowed with age, still bore the shaky handwriting of a young woman who knew nothing about business, but had the iron determination of a desperate mother. There was the receipt for the first loan I took out in 1995. $50,000 that Chase Bank granted me only because I mortgaged the house where Dan slept every night. I remembered that March morning when the branch manager looked at me over his glasses and said, "Ma'am, are you sure a widow can run a business?" I told him I had no choice. Dan was 8 years old and had started asking why his classmates had new toys, and he was still playing with the same second-hand cars. The first few years were a silent hell. I got up at 3:30 in the morning to knead the bread, worked until 8 at night serving customers, then came home to help Dan with his homework, make dinner, and do the laundry. My hands bled from so much kneading. I lost 12 pounds in the first year because I forgot to eat, always busy serving others. Dan didn't know any of this. To him, Mom just worked at a bakery. He didn't know I was the owner because I never wanted to burden him with responsibilities that weren't his. On weekends, when his friends went to the park, I took him with me to the bakery. He played among the bags of flour while I calculated numbers in a worn notebook, trying to stretch every dollar until the end of the month. I found a photo from that time. Dan was 10 and smiling, covered in flour from head to toe, holding a loaf of bread he had helped make. I was in the background, very thin, with deep circles under my eyes but smiling, always smiling for him. On the back of the photo, in my handwriting from then, I had written, "My little baker, all this will be yours someday. All this will be yours someday." How prophetic that phrase had been. Except, someday had arrived much sooner than I expected, and in a way I never imagined. I continued reviewing papers. The expansion contract from 2003, when we opened the second location. Dan was 16 and wanted to study business administration. Private colleges cost a fortune, but I had been saving dollar by dollar for 8 years. I had enough money to pay for his studies or to expand the business, but not both. One night, Dan came into my room while I was doing accounts in bed, surrounded by bills and calculators. "Mom," he said with that voice that had started to change, "don't worry about college. I can go to a state school and work weekends." I looked at him, this boy who was becoming a man, and felt my heart break with love and pride. How could I not give everything for him? The next day, I mortgaged the house for the second time. I paid for his college and opened the second location. For 5 years, I worked at both places, running from one to the other in my old '98 Honda Civic, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on coffee and the hope that someday he would take charge and I could rest. But Dan had bigger dreams. When he graduated, he came home with a folder full of ambitious projects. He wanted to modernize everything: new machines, contemporary design, digital marketing, a sophisticated logo. "Mom, this has the potential to be a chain. We could have 10 locations in 5 years. But we need serious investment, not these old-fashioned methods." Old-fashioned methods. That's what he called the work that had kept us alive for 10 years. I told him we didn't have enough capital for so many changes. Then he presented his plan. "We can get a large business loan, but we need to restructure the ownership. It's better if everything is in my name. Banks trust young executives with college degrees more than in, well, you know. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Banks trusted him more than a 52-year-old widow whose only education was the school of hard knocks. I signed every paper he put in front of me: property transfers, change of ownership, power of attorney documents. He explained each document to me patiently, as if I were a small child who didn't understand complicated words. "Don't worry, Mom. It's just paperwork. You're still the founder, the head of the family. This is just to facilitate the banking process." Founder. What a beautiful and empty word at the same time. Over the next few years, the business grew spectacularly. We opened the third location, then a catering service, then a gourmet product line. Profits multiplied. Dan appeared in local magazines as the young entrepreneur who revolutionized traditional city baking. In those interviews, he sometimes mentioned that he had inherited his love of baking from his family, but he never specified from whom or how. I continued working, but my role had changed. I no longer made important decisions. Those were made by Dan and Chelsea, who joined the business as administrative director shortly after they married. I had become the traditional recipe expert, a kind of nostalgic mascot that guaranteed the authenticity of the products. The new employees treated me with respect, but it was clear they didn't know who I really was. To them, I was the boss's mother, an older woman who knew a lot about bread but didn't understand market strategies or profitability analysis. One afternoon, while organizing the storage room of the first location, the one I had opened with my own hands, I heard 2 young employees talking. "Did you know this bakery used to belong to Mrs. Miller?" "Really? What happened?" "No idea. I guess she sold it to her son when she got too old to manage it herself." She sold it to her son, as if Dan had bought my business instead of inheriting it. As if I had decided to retire instead of being gradually edged out of the decisions concerning my own company. That night, at home, I asked Dan about the profits for the last quarter. They had been especially good thanks to a large contract with several downtown hotels. "How much money are we making, son?" "We're fine, Mom. Don't worry about those things. But I'd like to know the exact figures. After all, I'm still a partner." Dan exchanged a look with Chelsea. She was painting her nails on the sofa, with that concentration she put into everything that made her feel important. "Mom, you're not officially a partner anymore, remember? You signed the transfer 5 years ago. Now you're an employee. A very valuable and loved employee, but an employee. Employee. In the company that was born from my hands, my sleepless nights, my blood and my tears. But Dan, I thought that was just temporary, for the bank paperwork." "No, Mom. It was final. It's all in the papers you signed. If you want, you can review them with a lawyer. But I assure you everything is in order." Chelsea looked up from her nails for the first time in the entire conversation. "Mrs. Miller, don't worry. Dan will always take care of you. You've worked enough. It's time for you to enjoy your retirement." Retirement. At 57 years old. Without having decided myself when or how. That night I searched on Google, how to check the state business registry. I learned to navigate official pages that I didn't fully understand, but which confirmed what I already suspected. The Hearth Bakery, LLC, was listed in the name of Daniel Miller, sole proprietor, 100% of the shares. Eleanor Miller, the founder, did not appear in any official document. It was as if I had never existed. For weeks after that discovery, I continued working as if nothing had happened. I smiled at customers, prepared the recipes I had perfected for decades, and collected my employee salary that Dan deposited religiously every month into my account. A generous salary, mind you, much more than any normal employee would earn, but a salary nonetheless. The money I had invested, the profits my work had generated, the properties my sacrifices had paid for, now belonged to him. Legally, morally, completely to him. And I had become a stranger in my own story. The following months were a slow agony of small humiliations that accumulated like drops of poison. Each day brought a new confirmation that my place in the family had been redefined without consulting me, as if I were a piece of furniture that could be moved from room to room as convenient. The first symptom arrived in February, when I turned 69. Traditionally, Dan organized a small celebration at one of the locations after business hours. Employees brought a cake, we sang happy birthday, and he always ended with a small speech about how important I was to the company and the family. This year, nothing. I arrived at work that morning expecting to find some decoration, some gesture, anything that recognized it was my special day. Instead, I found Chelsea reorganizing the main counter. "Morning, Mrs. Miller," she said without looking up from her papers. "Dan is in meetings with investors all day. We need you to take charge of oven number 3. Maria called in sick. Nothing more. As if it were any Tuesday. As if 69 years of life didn't deserve even 5 minutes of attention. At 4 in the afternoon, when all hope was lost, Dan appeared with a small box wrapped in generic gift paper. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Sorry I forgot this morning. We've been super busy with the new gluten-free product line." I opened the box. It was a bandana. A cheap bandana, the kind they sell at the dollar store, with a flower pattern that looked like it was printed with a home printer. They hadn't even removed the price tag. $3.99. "Thanks, son," I murmured, putting the bandana in my apron pocket. The year before, he had given me a silver necklace. The year before that, dinner at a nice restaurant. Every year, the gifts got smaller, more impersonal, more obviously an obligation fulfilled reluctantly. But what really hurt was discovering 2 days later that they had celebrated Chelsea's birthday with a full party. 3-tiered cake from the most expensive bakery in the city, Moet and Chandon champagne, decoration with gold and silver balloons. The photos were on the company's Instagram, celebrating our administrative director on her special day, Chuck Team Hearth, our family. Family. There was that word again, applied to the woman who had arrived 5 years earlier, while I, who had built that company from the ground up, deserved a $3.99 bandana and no social media photo. The small exclusions multiplied like a silent infection. The executive team meetings to which I was no longer invited. The working lunches where there used to be a place for me and now only those who make strategic decisions went. The conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the office, as if I were an intruder instead of the founder. One day, while organizing inventory in the storage room, I heard Chelsea talking on the phone with a supplier. Yes, indeed, we've changed a few things since we took over. The former Mrs. had very traditional methods. Now we handle everything with modern business criteria. The former Mrs., as if I were someone from the remote past, a historical anecdote irrelevant to the present. I froze behind the shelf, listening to Chelsea rewrite the history of my own company. According to her version, they had acquired a small artisan business and transformed it into a successful enterprise. There was no mention of who had laid the first stone, who had risked their assets, who had worked to exhaustion so they could inherit a prosperous empire. I arrived home that night more emotionally exhausted than physically. I prepared a chamomile tea and sat on the sofa, surrounded by the silence that had become my most faithful companion. I looked at the family photos on the mantelpiece and for the first time noticed something that chilled my blood. In the most recent photos, I appeared increasingly marginalized. Literally. In photos of family celebrations from the last 2 years, I was always on an edge, as if I had been included out of courtesy, but wasn't truly part of the main nucleus. In the photo of Dan and Chelsea's wedding, I was in the second row, behind her parents. In the photo of my granddaughter Paige's baptism, I was almost cut off by the edge of the frame. Last Christmas, while they posed in the center with radiant smiles, I was half hidden behind a Christmas tree. Even in family photographs, I had been demoted to a secondary character. April brought the last straw. Dan came home one afternoon with a serious expression I hadn't seen on him since his father's death. "Mom, we need to talk about something important." He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his homework for years, where we had breakfasted together thousands of mornings, where I had told him stories to comfort him when he had nightmares. "Chelsea and I have been reviewing the company finances," he began, avoiding my gaze, "and we've detected some irregularities in the expenses." Irregularities. My heart raced. "What kind of irregularities?" "Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but your paycheck is considerably higher than that of other employees with similar duties, and some of your personal expenses have been charged to the company." I was speechless. Personal expenses. For 30 years, it was normal for certain expenses to be blurred between personal and business because everything had been mine. The gas for the car I used to drive from one location to another, the meals I ate during work hours, the phone I used to coordinate with suppliers even at home. "Dan, I've always handled expenses that way. Since we opened..." "Yes, Mom, but things have changed. Now we have external auditors, more complex tax obligations. We can't afford for the IRS to misinterpret our accounting practices." Chelsea appeared behind him, with a folder in her hands and that smile I had learned to hate, sweet on the outside, calculating on the inside. "Mrs. Miller, we have prepared a document that clarifies these situations. We just need you to sign here to regularize everything." I looked at the papers they put in front of me. They were a labyrinth of legal language I didn't fully understand, but some phrases jumped out like daggers. Reimbursement of improperly received funds, retroactive payroll adjustment, return of non-justified expenses. They were asking me to return money, my own money, money I had earned working in the company I had founded. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked with a trembling voice. Dan and Chelsea exchanged a knowing look. "About $40,000, he said, as if commenting on the weather. $40,000, all my savings. All the financial security I had managed to accumulate after years of work. But Dan, that money..." "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's not like you have to pay it all back at once. We can deduct it gradually from your paycheck over the next 2 years. You won't even notice. I wouldn't even notice. As if it wasn't my money. As if it wasn't my security. As if it wasn't my dignity they were tearing apart with every word." That night, for the first time since George's death, I cried until I had no more tears. I cried for all the years I had given, believing I was building a shared future. I cried for the naivety of thinking that a mother's love was a safe investment. I cried for the woman I had been and no longer was, for the company I had lost without realizing it, for the family that tolerated me instead of loving me. But above all, I cried because I finally understood the truth I had been denying for years. To Dan, I was no longer his mother. I was an accounting problem to solve, an expense to optimize, an obstacle between him and his perfect version of entrepreneurial success. And the most painful thing of all was that he probably didn't even realize what he had done. In his mind, he was being generous to me. He paid me a good salary, included me in some family celebrations, treated me with the courtesy owed to a beloved veteran employee. What he didn't understand was that I didn't want his generosity. I wanted my place. I wanted the recognition of what I had built. I wanted people, when they talked about the Hearth Bakery, to remember that Eleanor wasn't just part of the name. She was the reason it all existed, but that Eleanor had died at some point without anyone realizing they should hold a funeral. I didn't sign the papers that night. I left them on the kitchen table as if they were an unexploded bomb, while Dan and Chelsea watched me with that expression of forced patience reserved for spoiled children or stubborn elderly people. I need time to think about it, I finally told them, my voice sounding firmer than I felt inside. Dan sighed with that contained exasperation he had perfected over the years. Mom, there's not much to think about. They're just legal formalities. The sooner we resolve it, the better for everyone. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. Chelsea collected the papers with precise movements, as if she were a secretary organizing documents after a routine business meeting. All right, Mrs. Miller, but keep in mind that the auditors need these signed papers before Friday. We can't afford delays with the IRS. After they left, I was left alone in the kitchen, staring at the chair where Dan had sat. The same chair where for years he had rushed through breakfast before school, where he had studied for exams while I made him sandwiches, where he had cried when he broke his leg playing soccer, and I comforted him by promising him everything would be okay. When had I stopped being his mother to become his problem? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake until 6 a.m, turning over the same question. What had I done wrong? I had worked 18 hours a day to give him a better life. I had paid for the best education I could afford. I had taught him the value of honest work and the importance of family. Where had I gone wrong? At 7 a.m, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my sister Carol, who lived in Miami, and with whom I barely spoke since she moved there 15 years ago. Carol had always been the family rebel, the one who married a local musician against our parents' wishes, the one who never had children because she preferred to live life rather than sacrifice herself for others. Eleanor, what's wrong? It's 7 a.m, she said with that husky voice of someone who had just woken up. I told her everything, from the group chat to the papers from last night, including years of humiliations I had been justifying as normal problems of families who work together. Carol listened in silence, interrupting me only to ask precise questions that forced me to confront realities I had been avoiding. Eleanor, do you have any copies of the original company documents? I think so. They're in the top drawer of George's desk. I never touched them after he died. Go get them. Right now. And don't sign anything until an independent lawyer reviews everything. After hanging up, I went up to the master bedroom and opened the mahogany desk that had belonged to my husband. George was meticulous with important papers. Everything was organized in folders labeled in his neat handwriting. Insurance, taxes, mortgage, company. In the company folder, I found the original incorporation documents for the bakery. My name appeared as the sole proprietor. I also found George's will, which I had never read completely because it made me too sad. In it, George left absolutely everything to me, including the 50% stake in the Hearth Bakery that corresponds to the marital assets. But according to the papers Dan had made me sign 5 years ago, I had donated my complete stake to him, a donation that was supposedly temporary for tax purposes. With the original documents in a bag, I drove to the law firm Carol had recommended. The office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with grating elevators that creak as they ascend. The lawyer, Martha Davis, was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed capable of detecting lies from miles away. After reviewing all the documents for an hour, Martha looked up and stared at me with an expression that mixed professional compassion with personal indignation. Mrs. Miller, what has happened here is technically legal, but ethically questionable. Your son convinced you to sign a complete donation of your business shares without adequate financial compensation. According to these documents, you donated assets valued at approximately $500,000. $500,000. The figure echoed in my head like an echo in an empty cathedral. Is there any way to reverse this? It depends. If you can prove you signed under deception or undue pressure, we could initiate legal proceedings. But it would be complex and costly, and you'd have to be prepared to legally confront your own son. I returned home that afternoon with more mental clarity than I'd had in years, but also with a pain deeper than anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just that Dan had stolen my company. It was that he had meticulously planned that theft for years, taking advantage of my maternal trust and my legal ignorance. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me in the living room with an expression of feigned concern. "Mom, where have you been all day? I've been calling you. Chelsea says you didn't go to work." I was consulting with a lawyer. Dan's expression changed instantly. The mask of the concerned son vanished, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "A lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer?" "To understand exactly what I signed 5 years ago, and to understand what you're trying to make me sign now." He sat on the edge of the sofa, adopting that tense posture he took when he was preparing for a confrontation. "Mom, I think you're confusing things. Everything we've done has been for your own good. To protect you from legal responsibilities you don't understand." "Protect me? By taking $500,000 from me? I didn't take anything. I gave you a comfortable life without worries. I pay you an excellent salary without you having to take responsibility for the difficult decisions." For the first time in 5 years, something broke inside me. It wasn't a silent break, like all the previous ones. It was an explosion that had been accumulating for decades. Difficult decisions that I made for 15 years before you even knew what it meant to own a company. Responsibilities that I took on when you were a child who only knew how to ask for money for his whims. Dan stood up abruptly, fists clenched. "Don't yell at me. I turned your little neighborhood bakery into a prosperous company. Without me, you'd still be selling single loaves of bread. Not without you, without my money, without my sacrifices, without my 20 years of work." Chelsea appeared at that moment, as if she had been waiting behind the door to make her dramatic entrance at the perfect moment. "Please calm down, both of you," she said with that saccharine voice she used when she wanted to seem like the reasonable adult in the middle of a conflict. "Mrs. Miller, I think you're very upset. Perhaps you should rest a bit before making important decisions." She looked at me with that condescending smile she had perfected, the smile that said, "Poor confused old lady," without uttering the words. "I'm not confused, Chelsea. I'm perfectly lucid. And I know exactly what you two have been doing." Dan approached me with his arms outstretched, trying one of those manipulative hugs he had used since childhood to get his way after misbehaving. "Mom, we're family. Family doesn't fight over money. Family takes care of each other." I pulled away from his arms as if they burned. Family also doesn't steal from its own members. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't delete their mothers from the group chat like they were trash. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with it. It's all part of the same pattern. You two have been gradually eliminating me from my own life. Chelsea sighed with that theatrical exasperation she had perfected. "Dan, I think your mother needs professional help. This kind of paranoia is typical in people her age when they start to lose their faculties. Faculties. As if the ability to recognize abuse were a symptom of senile dementia. That night, after they left with veiled threats about the legal consequences of not meeting tax obligations, I sat in my empty kitchen and made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going to sign anything. I wasn't going to return a single dollar of the money that was legitimately mine. And I wasn't going to continue pretending this was a family when it was clearly a commercial partnership where I had been degraded from founding partner to expendable employee. For the first time in 69 years, I was going to fight for what was mine. The decision came at 3 a.m, in that silent hour when the city sleeps and only the most honest thoughts remain. I got out of the bed where I had been tossing and turning for hours, put on the plush robe George had given me on our last anniversary, and went downstairs to the kitchen to make coffee. But instead of turning on the coffee maker, I sat down in front of the laptop Dan had given me last year. So you can stay connected, Mom. I learned to use it by watching YouTube tutorials, with the same patience I had used to learn everything else in my life: kneading bread, raising a son alone, building a business from scratch. I opened my online bank account. There was the $40,000 I had saved for years, dollar by dollar, saving from my employee salary in the company I myself had founded. Money that Dan wanted me to return as if it were an unauthorized loan instead of my own work. Next to it, in another tab, I opened the website for the Hearth Bakery. The photos of the new design shown on the screen. Modern locations with exposed brick walls, marble counters, Italian coffee machines, young customers smiling while holding artisan products in craft paper bags, with the elegant logo Chelsea had designed. All very beautiful, all very prosperous, all built on the foundations I had laid working until my hands bled. In the Our History section, I found the official company biography. Founded in 2008 by Daniel Miller, a visionary entrepreneur who combined family baking tradition with modern business techniques. 2008, the year Dan graduated from college and officially joined the business. 13 years after I opened the first location with my own hands and my own investment. According to this official version, the first 13 years of sweat, tears, and sacrifice simply hadn't existed. I closed the laptop and made a decision that had been months, perhaps years, gestating in a corner of my soul that had remained asleep for too long. At 7 a.m, I called work. "The Hearth Bakery," Sandra answered, one of the youngest employees. "Sandra, it's Eleanor. Call Dan and tell him I'm not coming in today. And not tomorrow either, and that I'll let him know when I'll be back. But Mrs. Miller, we have the big order for the Drake Hotel, and you're the only one who knows how to prepare the specialty muffins the way they like them. Have Chelsea prepare them. After all, she's the administrative director, isn't she? I'm sure she can handle a recipe." I hung up before Sandra could reply. For the first time in 30 years, a workday had begun without me kneading dough, lighting ovens, or serving customers. I stayed in my nightgown until 11 a.m, slowly drinking coffee and watching through the window as people walked down the street, with the morning rush of those who have important places to be. I was not in a hurry. I had nowhere to be except here, in my own house, making decisions for the first time in decades. The phone rang 14 times that morning. Dan, Chelsea, Sandra, even some suppliers who needed to confirm orders that apparently only I knew how to manage. I didn't answer any calls. Instead, I went outside. I walked around the neighborhood as I hadn't in years, without haste, without a specific destination, simply observing. I stopped in front of the flower shop where I bought centerpieces for special occasions. The owner, Maria, greeted me with a genuine smile. "Eleanor, how strange to see you out here on a workday. Everything okay?" "Everything perfect, Maria. In fact, better than ever. I bought a bouquet of orange gerberas, my favorite flowers, the ones I never bought for myself because there were always more important expenses, more urgent needs, priorities that didn't include making myself happy. I continued walking until I reached the local park, where I sat on a bench under an old sycamore tree. Around me, young mothers pushed strollers while talking on the phone. Retirees played dominoes at the stone tables. Children chased pigeons that took flight at the last moment. Normal life. Normal people living their normal lives without existential crises, or children who treated them as expendable employees. I stayed there for 2 hours, simply existing without producing anything, without serving anyone, without being useful for any purpose higher than my own well-being. The feeling was so strange it almost made me dizzy. When I returned home, there were 17 missed calls. This time, I answered when the phone rang. "Mom, where the hell are you? I've been calling you all day," Dan yelled without even greeting me. "I'm at my house, and lower your voice when you talk to me. You can't just disappear without notice. We have responsibilities. The order for the Drake Hotel was a disaster. Chelsea had to call an outside bakery to fill it." "That's a shame," I said with a calm that surprised even myself. "I suppose the administrative director will have to learn how to make muffins." "This isn't a game, Mom. You have to be here at 6 in the morning tomorrow. No, Dan, I'm not going to be there at 6 in the morning tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow. In fact, I'm seriously considering whether I want to continue working at a company where I'm treated like a problematic employee. Silence. A silence so prolonged I thought the call had been cut off. What do you mean by that? I mean I'm tired. Tired of working at a company that, according to its own website, was founded by you in 2008. Tired of being paid a salary to work at the business I created with my own hands. Tired of asking permission to exist in my own life. Mom, you're being dramatic. No, Dan. For the first time in years, I'm being honest. That night, I dined alone at the Italian restaurant on the corner, ordering exactly what I wanted to eat without consulting anyone else. Osso buco with saffron risotto and a glass of Chianti that went to my head a little, but made me feel elegant and sophisticated. The waiter, an older man with a Neapolitan accent, treated me with the natural courtesy owed to any customer who pays for a service. Not with condescension, not with forced patience, not as if I were a burden to tolerate. Simply with respect. Anything else, ma'am? No, thank you. Everything was perfect. And it was. For the first time in months, something in my life was exactly as I wanted it to be. Back home, I took a long bath with lavender salts that I had bought years ago and never used because there was always something more urgent to do, someone more important to attend to. I put on the silk nightgown I was saving for special occasions that never came, and sat on the sofa with chamomile tea and the book I had been trying to read for 6 months at a rate of 5 minutes before falling asleep from exhaustion. Tonight, I read for 2 hours straight. A novel about a woman who discovered her strength after 60. What a comforting coincidence. At 11 at night, when I would normally be asleep to wake up at 5:30, I was still awake and alert, without that bone-deep fatigue that had been my constant companion for decades. For the first time in 30 years, I went to bed when I wanted to, instead of when obligations allowed. And for the first time in years, I slept 8 hours straight without waking up once worrying about batches of bread, urgent orders, or employees calling in sick. I woke up feeling like a new person, a person who had the right to make decisions about her own life, a person who owed no one explanations about how she wanted to spend her days, a person I had forgotten existed until yesterday, but who was waking up after a very long dream. The first morning of my new life had begun, and this time no one else was going to write the script for me. The siege began on Wednesday. First came Chelsea, appearing at my door at 8 in the morning with her sweetest smile and a bag of croissants from the competition, a detail that did not go unnoticed. "Mrs. Miller, I came to see how you are. Dan is very worried about you." I let her in because curiosity overcame caution. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. She sat on my sofa as if she owned the house, elegantly crossed her legs, and deployed her strategy with a surgeon's precision. "Look, I understand that you feel a little displaced. It's normal at your age. My own mother went through the same thing when she turned 70, a kind of late-life existential crisis. Late-life existential crisis, as if the ability to recognize abuse had an expiration date. Chelsea, I don't have a crisis. For the first time in years, I see things with absolute clarity. Yes, that's exactly what my mother said," she continued with that condescending smile she had perfected. "That's why I think it would be good for you to talk to someone. I know a psychologist who specializes in older adults that—" "I don't need a psychologist. I need you to give me back my company." The smile wavered for the first time. "Mrs. Miller, you voluntarily donated your shares. It's all signed and registered. We can't give back something that legally isn't yours anymore." I got up and walked toward the window, turning my back to her while organizing my thoughts. On the street, life continued its normal course. Mothers taking children to school, workers waiting for the bus, retirees buying the newspaper, normal people who didn't have to battle with their own children for the right to exist with dignity. Do you know the difference between a donation and theft, Chelsea? Ma'am, please don't be dramatic. The difference is deceit. I signed those papers because Dan told me it was temporary, that it was just for tax purposes. He lied to me. That turns the donation into fraud. When I turned around, Chelsea was no longer smiling. Her mask had cracked just enough to show something colder underneath. proving that would be very difficult and very costly. Do you really want to destroy your own family over money? My family is already destroyed. What I want is to reclaim my dignity. She left without saying goodbye, taking her untouched croissants with her. Thursday, Dan arrived with reinforcements. My granddaughter, Paige, with eyes red from crying. "Grandma, Dad says you don't want to work with us anymore," she said between manufactured sobs. "He says the company is going to sink without you and we're all going to lose our money." Dan stayed behind, directing the performance with the subtlety of an amateur puppeteer. "Paige is very worried about her future, Mom. Her private college costs $30,000 a year. If the company has problems..." I looked at my granddaughter, this child who had grown up in the abundance that my sacrifices had made possible, and felt a mixture of love and disillusionment that hurt more than any previous betrayal. "Paige, come here," I said, sitting on the sofa and patting the cushion next to me. She approached, her eyes bright with tears that were probably genuine, even if the reason behind them had been manipulated. "Do you know who founded the Hearth Bakery?" "Dad," she replied without hesitation. "And do you know what year?" "In 2008, when he graduated from college." I nodded slowly, feeling how every word confirmed the effectiveness of the historical erasure they had executed. "Paige, what do you think your dad did for a living before 2008? Did he live on air?" The girl looked at me confused. "I guess he worked somewhere else?" "No, honey. He lived off the bread I baked since 1995, when he was 8 years old. He lived off the company that I founded, that I financed, that I built working 18-hour days so he could study and have the comfortable life he always had." Paige looked at her father for confirmation, but Dan avoided her gaze. "Mom, don't fill her head with the truth," I exploded, turning to Dan with a fury that had been accumulating for years. "The truth that you two have been hiding to justify the most elaborate theft I've ever seen in my life?" I took out the documents I had been keeping in the living room drawer since my visit to the lawyer. "Here are the original papers, Paige. Here is your grandfather's will. Here is the evidence that your father stole $500,000 from me with lies and manipulation." Dan turned pale. "Mom, put those papers away. You don't know the damage you could do." "Damage? To whom? To the thieves who stole my assets? To the liars who erased my existence from history?" Paige looked alternately at the papers and her father's face, seeing for the first time the cracks in the narrative she had grown up believing. "Dad, did you steal from Grandma?" "Of course not. Everything was done legally, with lawyers, with signed papers." "Legally? Yes," I cut in, "but with deception. You told me it was temporary. You told me it was only for tax purposes. You lied to me for 5 years to convince me to sign my assets over to you." Dan took Paige's hand and headed toward the door. "Let's go, Paige. Your grandmother needs medical help, and until she gets it, we can't reason with her." But Paige pulled her hand away and stood looking intently at me. "Grandma, did Dad really steal from you?" The question dropped into the silence like a stone in a pond, creating ripples that reached every corner of the room. "Yes, Paige. Your father and your stepmother stole my company and then tried to convince me that it had been my idea to give it away." Paige started to cry again, but this time she directed her tears at Dan. "How could you do that, Dad? She's your mother." "Paige, you don't understand the complexities of adult business." "I understand that stealing is wrong," she shouted with the pure indignation that only adolescents have when they discover that the adults they trusted are corrupt. She walked toward me and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know. I truly didn't know anything." Dan slammed the door shut, making the glasses in the cupboard rattle. That night, as I was eating a simple salad in my kitchen, the doorbell rang. It was Paige, alone this time, with a small backpack and eyes still swollen. "Can I stay with you tonight, Grandma? I don't want to be home with Dad and Mom." I let her in and made her hot cocoa while she told me in whispers about the argument at their house after they left mine. Dad yelled at Mom that all this was her fault, that she had given him bad advice. Mom yelled that he was a coward who didn't know how to control his own mother. They both said horrible things. "And what do you think about all this, Paige?" She was silent for a long time, stirring the cocoa with the spoon. "I think I'm 14, and I already knew that stealing was wrong. I don't understand how Dad, who is 42, didn't." For the first time in weeks, I smiled with genuine joy. "That," Paige, is the question that defines everything. That night, while my granddaughter slept in the guest room, I stayed up in the living room, looking at the family photos with new eyes. In every image where we appeared all together, I could now see what I hadn't wanted to recognize before. I was always slightly set apart, slightly out of focus, slightly less important than the others. But that was about to change. It was time to take full control of my own story. The days that followed the confrontation were like waking up from a decades-long coma. Every morning brought a new revelation about who I was when no one else defined my worth, my purpose, or my place in the world. Paige stayed with me for a whole week. At first, I thought it would be complicated to take care of a 14-year-old after so many years. But I discovered something surprising. When you don't have to constantly prove your usefulness to someone, when you don't have to justify every minute of your existence by being productive for others, you turn out to have infinite energy for the things that really matter. I taught her to make French toast like my mother used to, with milk, cinnamon, and a touch of lemon zest that was our family secret. Paige learned with that intense concentration young people have when someone teaches them something valuable without haste, without pressure, just for the pleasure of passing on knowledge. Grandma, why didn't you ever teach me this before? Because before I was always in a hurry, honey. There was always something more urgent to do, someone more important to attend to. As we kneaded dough together in my kitchen, Paige told me things I had never known about her life, her fears about high school, her dreams of studying art instead of business administration like her father wanted, her doubts about whether she really wanted to inherit a business built on lies. Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is, Grandma? What? That for years I thought Dad was a business genius. Now I realize he was just very good at stealing. The brutal sincerity of adolescence can be devastating and healing at the same time. On Wednesday of that week, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I drove downtown, parked across from the federal courthouse, and climbed the marble stairs that led to the Superior Court. The lawyer, Martha Davis, had prepared all the necessary documents for me to initiate a civil lawsuit against Dan. Fraud, misappropriation, deception for profit. Technical words that translated into plain English meant, my son stole from me, and now I'm going to get back what is mine. When I handed the papers to the clerk, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. Sadness because I was suing the child I had raised, the man I had carried in my womb for 9 months. Liberation because I was finally defending myself instead of enduring in silence. Are you sure you want to proceed with this, ma'am? The clerk asked me, an older man who had probably seen many similar cases. Family lawsuits are often emotionally complicated. I am completely sure. When someone steals from you, you file a report. It doesn't matter if that someone is a stranger or your own son. I left the courthouse feeling 2 inches taller. That afternoon, while Paige was doing her homework at the kitchen table, I received a call I didn't expect. It was Mark, the owner of Bread of Life Artisan Bakery, a small spot in the arts district that had been struggling against the big commercial chains. Mrs. Miller, I heard you're no longer working at the Hearth Bakery. Would it be possible for us to meet? I have a proposal that might interest you. We met the next day at his bakery. It was a small place, with that authentic feel that big businesses lose when they become obsessed with efficiency and profitability. It smelled exactly like my first location 30 years ago. Fermented dough, toasted flour, honest work. Mark was a man in his 40s, with flour-dusted hands and the nervous energy of someone who loves what he does, but constantly struggles to survive financially. Mrs. Miller, I know your reputation. All the bakers in the city know who truly founded the Hearth Bakery, regardless of what their official website says. I was surprised to discover that my story was known in the trade, that my work had recognition beyond the walls of my own family. I have a slightly crazy proposal, Mark continued as he poured me coffee into a chipped mug that reminded me of my first years in business. I want to open a second location, but I don't have the technical knowledge or the experience to manage it. Would you be interested in being my partner? Partner? It had been years since anyone offered me a partnership in anything. What kind of partnership? 50-50 on everything. Investment, profits, decisions. You contribute the experience and some of the initial capital, I contribute the energy and the rest of the money. But most importantly, your name would appear on everything. As founder, as partner, as the expert you are. For the first time in decades, someone was offering me recognition instead of charity. That night, Paige and I cooked a Cajun jambalaya in the giant skillet I had inherited from my mother. As we sautéed the vegetables, I told her about Mark's proposal. "Are you going to do it, Grandma? What do you think? I think you're 69 years old, and for the first time in a long time, you genuinely look happy. I think Dad has no right to steal your future in addition to your past." The wisdom of 14 years can be terrifyingly clear. On Saturday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I bought new clothes. Not practical clothes for work, not comfortable clothes for doing chores. Clothes I liked that made me feel elegant, that reflected who I wanted to be instead of what others needed me to be. At Nordstrom, I tried on dresses, brightly colored blouses I had never dared to wear, shoes that weren't completely flat. The saleswoman, a young woman with tattoos on her arms, treated me like any normal customer, without condescension, without pity. "That color looks spectacular on you, ma'am. It really brings out your eyes." I looked at myself in the dressing room mirror, and, for the first time in years, I saw a woman instead of a machine for serving others. A woman with the right to take up space, to be seen, to matter. I bought 3 complete outfits and a red wool coat that cost more than I had spent on myself the entire previous year. When I paid with my card, using my own money earned from my own work, I felt a satisfaction I didn't remember ever experiencing. On Sunday, I took Paige to lunch at a high-end restaurant near the city's Performing Arts Center, that elegant place where I had never gone because it always seemed too sophisticated for someone like me. We ordered seafood, drank white wine, and talked like adults about life, dreams, and the importance of not letting others write your story. "Grandma, there's something I want to tell you," Paige said, as we shared a creme brulee for dessert. "Tell me, honey. I want to come live with you, at least until I'm 18. I don't want to live in a house built on lies and stolen money." I stared at her, this child who was becoming a woman and who had decided to choose integrity over comfort. "Are you sure? Your life would be very different here. Fewer luxuries, less money, more honesty," she interrupted. "More respect. More real conversations instead of family performances." That night, I called my sister Carol to tell her everything that had happened. We had only talked on holidays and birthdays for 15 years, but when I explained the situation, her response was immediate. "Eleanor, you finally woke up. I've been waiting for this call for years. You knew what was happening? It was obvious to anyone not blinded by maternal love, but you had to realize it yourself. No one can free you from a prison you don't recognize as such." On Monday morning, I called Mark and accepted his partnership proposal. I also called a real estate agent to put the house where I had lived for 30 years up for sale. A house too big for a single woman, full of memories that now hurt more than they consoled me. Paige and I would move to a smaller apartment in the Arts District, near the new bakery. A place where we could start from scratch, without ghosts of the past, without inherited obligations. That afternoon, when Dan finally showed up at my door after 2 weeks of silence, he found me packing books into cardboard boxes. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm moving," I said, without looking up from the books. "And Paige is coming with me." "You can't take my daughter. Paige is 14 and has a voice of her own. Ask her what she wants to do." For the first time in decades, I didn't feel the need to justify my decisions or soften my words to avoid hurting his feelings. He hadn't had those considerations with me. "Mom, drop the lawsuit and we can talk about all this as a family." "No, Dan. We are no longer family. We are strangers who share a last name and some memories. Family takes care of each other. They don't steal." He left without saying goodbye. That night, as Paige and I ate omelets in the half-empty kitchen, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, no one else had power over my decisions. It was terrifying and absolutely wonderful at the same time. 6 months later, as the June sun filtered through the windows of Eleanor and Mark's artisan bakery, I paused for a moment to observe what we had built together. The aroma of fresh bread filled the place, mixing with the laughter of customers waiting in line for our specialties. On the main wall hung a framed photo. Me, at 28. Apron stained with flour, holding the first loaf of bread that came out of my original oven in 1995. Below, A simple golden plaque inscription, Eleanor Miller, founder and master baker since 1995. Finally, my history had the recognition it deserved. Paige had adapted to our new life with the natural flexibility of young people who have not yet developed a fear of change. She studied at a public high school near the apartment, had made new friends who came to the bakery for an afternoon snack, and in the evenings, she helped me with the accounts while doing her homework. "Grandma, this letter arrived for you," she said one May afternoon, handing me an official envelope that I immediately recognized. It was the judicial resolution of my lawsuit against Dan. Martha Davis had done an exceptional job. The judge had ruled in my favor on all counts, recognizing the fraud, ordering the repayment of $300,000 plus interest, and establishing that Dan had to pay me additional compensation for emotional distress. I read the verdict twice, not because it was hard to understand, but because after so many years of injustice, real justice seemed too good to be true. "What does it say, Grandma?" "It says you were right, Paige. It says stealing is still wrong, even when the person doing the stealing is your own son." I didn't feel the vengeful satisfaction I had expected. Instead, I experienced something closer to relief, the feeling that the universe had finally recognized that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the abuse, that my version of events was the true one. Dan never answered my calls after the sentence. Chelsea closed the company's social media, and for weeks, the 3 locations of the Hearth Bakery operated with reduced hours as they tried to reorganize without my experience and without the funds they had lost. According to some suppliers I had known for decades, the quality of the products had dropped considerably. Regular customers complained that it didn't taste the same as before, that something had changed. Something had changed indeed. The person who knew how to make everything work was no longer there to fix the problems that others created. In July, I received an unexpected visit. Carol had come from Miami to spend a week with us. Seeing my sister after so many years was like reuniting with a version of myself that had been dormant for decades. "Do you know what your mistake was all these years, Eleanor?" she said as we had coffee on the balcony of our apartment. "What? You believed that love is shown by sacrificing yourself. You were taught that being a good mother meant disappearing as a person. But children don't need martyr mothers. They need mothers who know how to defend themselves, who teach them by example that every person has the right to be respected." Carol was right. For years, I had confused love with self-cancellation, care with submission, generosity with foolishness. One August afternoon, while organizing the inventory in the back room, I heard a familiar voice asking for me at the counter. It was Paige, but she sounded nervous. "Grandma, someone here wants to see you." I walked out expecting to find a customer or maybe a supplier, but I froze when I saw Dan standing by the cash register. He had lost weight, had deep dark circles under his eyes, and something in his posture suggested a defeat I had never seen in him before. "Hello, Mom." Dan. We stared at each other for a moment that felt eternal. Paige discreetly withdrew to the kitchen, leaving us alone with 30 years of family history floating between us like a ghost. "How are you?" "Good. Busy. Prosperous." "I'm glad." He nodded toward the photos on the walls, toward the shop full of customers, toward the tangible evidence that I had managed to rebuild my life without him. "Looks like you're successful. It's called working honestly and treating people well. You should try it sometime." He winced slightly at the harshness of my tone, but he didn't defend himself. "Mom, I came to apologize." "For which part? For stealing from me? For lying to me for years? For deleting me from the group chat? For treating me like an expendable employee in the company I founded? For all of it. For losing sight of who you really are." I leaned against the counter, studying the face of the man who had been my child, looking for traces of sincerity in an expression I had learned to distrust. "And who am I really, Dan? You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You're the person who gave me everything without asking for anything in return. You're my mother, and I forgot that." The words were nice, but they came too late and after too much damage. "Do you know when I realized I had lost you forever, Dan? When? When you used Paige to manipulate me. When you made her cry with lies to pressure me into doing what you wanted. At that moment, I knew there was nothing left of the boy I had raised. His eyes filled with tears, but I no longer felt the automatic compulsion to console him. Is there any way to fix this, Mom? I don't know, Dan. But if there is, it starts with you learning to live with the consequences of your decisions. It starts with you building something of your own instead of stealing what others built. He stayed for a few more minutes. We talked about superficial things, the weather, the changes in the neighborhood. When he left, I felt neither pain nor relief, just a kind of curious neutrality. Like when you finish reading a book you once loved, but that no longer speaks to you. Paige appeared next to me as we watched Dan walk away down the street. Are you okay, Grandma? Perfectly fine. Do you think he'll change? I don't know, honey. But it's no longer my responsibility to help him change. That time in my life is over. In September, a journalist from the New York Times contacted me to write an article about older women who had rebuilt their lives after 60. The interview was published with the title, Eleanor Miller, the woman who reclaimed her business and her dignity at 69. The article generated hundreds of comments from women who had lived similar situations, who identified with my story, who felt inspired by my example. For the first time in my life, my experience served to help other people instead of just being a painful family anecdote. Mark and I decided to expand the business. We opened a small cafe attached to the bakery where we served homemade breakfasts and afternoon treats. Paige designed the logo and graphic materials as a school project. She had a natural talent for art, something Dan had never encouraged because it wasn't practical for business. On December 24th of this year, exactly 1 year after that WhatsApp message that changed my life, Paige and I prepared an intimate dinner at our apartment. Just the two of us, with candles, soft music, and a conversation that flowed naturally between generations that respected each other. Grandma, do you know the difference between this Christmas and last year's? What? This year, I'm having dinner with someone who truly loves me, not with people who tolerate me out of convenience. We toasted with sparkling cider and exchanged gifts we had chosen with care and affection. Paige gave me an apron embroidered with my name and the founding date of my first bakery. I gave her a professional set of paintbrushes she had been asking for months. That night, before going to sleep, I stood on the balcony for a while, looking at the Christmas lights of the city. The city shone with millions of tiny lights, each one representing a home, a family, a story. My story had completely changed in 12 months. I had lost a son, but had gained a granddaughter. I had lost a company, but had founded another. I had lost a false family, but had built an authentic life. For the first time in decades, when I thought about the future, I didn't feel anxiety but curiosity. What adventures awaited me? What new things would I learn? How much life did I have left to live on my own terms? If you've made it this far listening to my story, if at any point you've identified with what I've lived, I want to ask you something. Is there someone in your life who treats you the way I was treated? Someone who makes you feel invisible, expendable, guilty of existing? Answer in the comments and tell me if you've also lived something like this, or if you know someone who needs to. Hear that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. If this story has touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I need this message to reach all the people who, like me, have forgotten that they deserve respect, true love, and the right to write their own story. Because sometimes, the most beautiful Christmas is the one you celebrate with the people who truly value your presence, even if they are fewer than you expected.